Mississippi, 1851. At Bowman Place, the cicadas screamed until the sound stopped meaning anything at all. Dogs gave up barking. People moved slowly, as if speed itself were a luxury no one could afford, and through it all, Eliza moved the way. She always had carefully. Not careful like fear alone, but careful like survival learned early and practiced daily. Careful hands, careful words, careful eyes that learned how to look without being seen. She had grown up on this land. She knew it in her bones. She could walk from the slave quarters to the big house in total darkness without stubbing a toe. She knew which porchboard would cry out before it ever had the chance to betray her. At 23, Eliza belonged everywhere, and nowhere at all. To the overseer, she was simply useful. Not worth knowing, not worth remembering, but an object, a useful object to satisfy his desires. The overseer knew only her name, HR age, and her duties. Eliza, female, age approximately 23, house servant. Her mother's low hum at night, steady and warm, as fingers worked through her hair. The sound of auction crowds in town, the way voices changed when bodies became prices. The day Mrs. Beaumont noticed she had grown tall and pretty and said, almost casually, now Eliza was a full-grown girl. Her body was attractive and she was capable of providing services. We'll move you into the house. You've got hands for finer work. She learned the exact way napkins were folded, the number of sugar lumps guests preferred without asking. She learned how to move so softly she might as well have been air. And she learned something else too. The smaller she made herself, the safer she felt. That rule worked, until the night it didn't. It was the summer Mrs. Beaumont left. Some said she had gone to Charleston to visit a sick sister. Others whispered she was the one who needed sea air, tired of heat, tired of debt, tired of watching herself fade in mirrors that remembered better years. Whatever the reason, the house changed when she was gone. Silence moved in. Not peace, not calm. A waiting silence that sat in corners and listened. That night, Eliza was clearing dishes after a late supper. She was wearing a dress, a torn dress. Her body parts were visible. Mr. Beaumont sat alone at the head of the table, collar loose, vest undone. A lamp between them casting tired yellow light across his face. His ledger lay open beside a nearly empty bottle of whiskey. Fork up, fork down. Eyes on numbers, not food. Eliza moved around him quietly, collecting plates, wiping a smear of gravy with practiced care. Leave it. The words cut through the room. She froze. I said, leave it. There was no anger in his voice, something worse, something raw. No point scrubbing small stains, he muttered, staring at the tablecloth, when the whole house is marked. She straightened slowly, unsure which rule applied now. Apologize or disappear. You need more coffee, sir, she offered. Sit. Her heart stumbled. I said, sit, Eliza. He said her name like it belonged to him. She was confused. She lowered herself into a chair halfway down the table, perched on the edge, ready to flee if she needed to. He poured himself another drink. You want some? No, sir, he snorted softly. Forgot. Not supposed to mix the master's drink with the slave's lips. The air thickened. He looked at her like he was seeing her for the first time. You've got your mother's eyes, he said quietly. Her fingers tightened in her lap. I remember when you were little. Used to hide under this table. Thought. If you made yourself small enough, no one could see you. I was playing, she said quickly. You were surviving. The room felt too close. Why am I here, sir? He laughed once, bitter and tired. If you'd done something wrong, you'd be on the other side of my temper. He stood. Come here, Eliza. Come close to me. His eyes were giving a different message to Eliza. She didn't move fast. She didn't move slow. She moved because the world had taught her what happened when you didn't. You keep my house like it's yours, he said. You make everything smoother, quieter, easier. His voice dropped, getting heavier. I'm tired of sleeping alone in a big empty bed. Her stomach twisted. I want someone who already knows where the cups are, he continued. Someone who won't talk nonsense at breakfast. This wasn't choice. It was gravity. What happened next would never be written down. Not in ledgers, not in letters, not in law. What Eliza gave that night was not consent. She could not resist, she knew. She was only a slave, just an object to fulfill his master's desires. She could say nothing but whispered only, Yes, sir. She had to accept him what he desired. Mr. Beaumont grabbed Eliza in his arms from her waist and started kissing her and cuddling. Her clothes were being lowered slowly and slowly. She could feel her skirt was not part of her body now. Both were on floor now, not in bed. He could not stay any more to suppress his desire. Eliza could feel Mr. Beaumont's lips on her neck and then down to her chest. This was her first experience which she wanted to avoid but could not, as she was only a slave, an object, just a number on ledger. Then, in dim light, there were only two bodies cuddling, kissing, and fulfilling the desires. She could not resist, she gave what he demanded. One body had no consent, but the other one with desires. That night, another virgin girl was deflowered. Mr. Beaumont and Eliza did not sleep the whole night. Now Eliza was his second wife, a wife who cannot be in daylight. In the weeks that followed, people noticed changes. Eliza no longer slept in her old bunk. She has been seen coming from Mr. Beaumont's room before the sunrise. They both were doing the same on every night. Her dress was slightly better. Her eyes carried shadows that had nothing to do with work. Mr. Beaumont slept easier, smiled more, said we when he talked about the house, and then the letter came. I am returning on the 1st of next month. Mrs. Margaret Beaumont. The walls stiffened. Second wife was not a role that survived daylight. When Margaret returned, thin and sharp as winter light, her eyes missed nothing. Not the way Eliza moved, not the way her husband looked, not the rhythm that didn't belong, and when she finally said, "Close the door," the story changed again. Margaret Beaumont returned to her house the way she had left it, in a fine carriage, with dust rising behind her, with the unspoken understanding that things had continued without her. The house was holding its breath. When the carriage stopped, Margaret stepped down with practiced grace. She was thinner than Eliza remembered, sharper. The months away had turned softness into angles, silk into steel. "Eliza," Margaret said, as if checking an item off a list. "Yes, ma'am, Eliza," murmured, dipping into a careful curtsy. Margaret's eyes swept over her, not lingering. Not soft, but intimate in a way only women could be, measuring fabric, posture, breath, the story the body told before the mouth ever spoke. "House looks settled," Margaret said at last. The pause before the words spoke louder than the words themselves. In the days that followed, Margaret reasserted herself the way queens reclaimed thrones. She reorganized drawers Eliza had arranged with care, shifted rugs that had quietly become familiar, took back rooms not because they needed changing, but because they needed reminding. At dinner, Margaret sat at the head of the table again. Mr. Beaumont sat opposite her, his laughter a second too slow, his eyes betraying him when Eliza entered the room. Margaret noticed. She noticed everything. The first time Eliza came alone into Margaret's dressing room, carrying a basin of water, Margaret set down her hairbrush, closed the door. The click of the latch echoed too loudly. "How long have you been sleeping in the house?" Margaret asked calmly. Eliza's heart lurched. "In this building," Margaret continued. "Under this roof, not in the quarters." "How long?" "Since late spring, ma'am," Eliza whispered. "And what did my husband need in the night?" The mirror caught both their reflections, two women standing inches apart, bound to the same man in very different ways, one by law, one by silence. Margaret stood. "Take off your sleeve." Hands shaking, Eliza obeyed. Faint bruises bloomed beneath the skin. Margaret inhaled slowly. "You think women don't recognize finger marks?" she asked quietly. "We learn early. We learn to read the body the way men read books." "I can. Even notice these marks on your body beneath your neck. What if I say to undress yourself and show me those marks?" Eliza pulled her dress up and her mistress noticed everything, every bruise on her shoulders, her chest and legs. Then Eliza pulled her fabric back down. "I fall sometimes," she said. Margaret held her gaze. The intimacy between them was not affection. It was recognition. A quiet, dangerous closeness born from shared knowledge. "From now on," Margaret said, voice controlled, "you sleep in the small room by the linen closet. Door open. You do not answer my husband after sundown." Relief and terror collided. In Eliza's chest. "Yes, ma'am. If he insists," Margaret added softly, "you come to me first." She paused. "I am still mistress of this house." The storm came days later. Thunder cracked so close it rattled dishes. Rain beat against the roof like fists demanding entry. Eliza lay awake in her narrow bed, counting seconds between lightning flashes the way she had as a child, pretending numbers could keep her safe. Then she heard her name. Eliza. Soft. Close. She didn't move. The door creaked open. "This is my house," Mr. Bowman murmured. "My arrangements." He stepped inside. Her breath caught. This was not romance. This was intimacy stolen, proximity forced, closeness weaponized. "Please," she whispered. He reached for her. He did everything he desired. Eliza could not resist. Her dress was not on her body again. The same act was being again performed. It was not love, it was not affection, it was the fulfillment of a desire, a lust. And then the door opened again. Margaret Bowman stood in the doorway, lightning carving her silhouette in white. Bowman. Just his name. No scream. No accusation. "Get off her." He stumbled back. Eliza clutched the sheet to her chest, heart. Hammering, Margaret stepped into the room. "This," she said coldly, "is the servants' hall. And this is my house." He left. The storm softened. The room felt enormous now. Margaret turned to Eliza. "Did he force you?" The question carried weight. History, understanding. "He's my master," Eliza said. "I'm not allowed to say no." Margaret closed her eyes. "How long?" "Since you left." Silence fell. This was intimacy without touch. Two women standing close enough to hear each other breathe, sharing a truth the world refused to name. "You hate me," Eliza whispered. "I don't have the luxury of hating you," Margaret replied. "Hatred has to land somewhere the law allows." She reached out, hesitated, then gently touched Eliza's cheek. It was not tenderness, it was acknowledgement, a careful, human contact that said, "I see you. You will move back near the kitchen," Margaret said. "You will sleep where others can hear you. If he comes again, scream." Eliza nodded. "And if a child comes of this," Margaret added, turning away, "you tell me first." "What story would you tell?" Eliza asked. "The one that keeps it alive." That night the storm passed. The house rearranged itself again, not into fairness, not into justice, but into something closer to mercy. There were now 3 people living inside a marriage meant for 2, and only one of them had any legal say at all. But the truth lived elsewhere, in women's memories, in whispered warnings, in quiet rooms where intimacy meant protection, not possession. In the days after the storm, the house did not return to normal. It never truly did. Instead, it learned a careful choreography, doors opening at the right times, voices rising just enough to be heard, footsteps never echoing alone. Eliza moved, through corridors like a held breath. She kept close to other women. She timed her work so there was always a witness nearby. When she passed Margaret in the hallway, their eyes met only briefly, but in that instant, something steady passed between them. Not friendship, not forgiveness, but an understanding that wrapped itself around both women like shared shelter. Mr. Beaumont sulked. He drank more, went to town more often, came back smelling of perfume not kept under his own roof. At meals, Margaret smiled, poured his wine, played the role expected of her. In private, her words were precise and sharp enough to cut away excuses. "You told me you couldn't manage this place without me," she said one evening. "Then you set up a replacement in a linen room." "That's not fair," he muttered. "Fair," she echoed softly. "Let's start with the number of choices she had compared to you." He had no answer for that. Eliza's life narrowed to kitchens and corridors. She learned which rooms were safest, which hours were most dangerous. She learned the sound of Margaret's footsteps, the way she had once learned the sound of her mother's hum. Sometimes when Mr. Beaumont tried to corner her, a door opened nearby. Sometimes a voice called her name, by accident. Sometimes Margaret appeared at the top of the stairs with an errand that could not wait. Protection did not look like rescue. It looked like timing, like presence, like refusing to let silence do its worst work. When the nausea came, Eliza told herself it was nothing. Bad. Food. Too much bending over the wash. Summer heat lingering too long in her body. But Lahi, the midwife, knew better. "You carrying?" she asked one quiet afternoon, hands firm on Eliza's wrist. Eliza let out a short, joyless laugh. "The law says, everything on this place belongs to him," she said, "including whatever grows inside me." Hannah, older now, slower but still sharp-eyed, clicked her tongue. "Baby going to hear your heartbeat first," she muttered. "Not his." Eliza swallowed. "Does it matter?" Hannah hesitated. "You told Miss Margaret." Fear crawled up Eliza's throat. "She told me to," Eliza whispered. "Said she'd decide what story to tell." "Then you best let her start telling it," Hannah said gently, "before he decides on his own." That evening, after the silver was polished and the table cleared, Eliza stood outside the parlor doorway. Her hands were damp. Her heart beat so hard she could hear it. Margaret sat by the fire, embroidery in her lap, spectacles perched low on her nose. She looked up as the shadow darkened the threshold. "Yes?" "Ma'am," Eliza said softly. "There's something you asked me to tell you first, if it ever happened." Margaret set down her needle. "Come in," she said. "Close the door." The latch clicked. Eliza did not have to say the word. Margaret's gaze dropped to her still flat stomach, then returned to her face. "How far?" she asked. "Not long," Eliza whispered. "Weeks, maybe." Her hands twisted in her apron. "I can fix it if you want. Lahi knows herbs." The suggestion hung between them like smoke. "No," Margaret said sharply. "No more dying in this house than we can help." Eliza's breath shook. Then what? Margaret crossed the room to her writing desk. From a drawer she took out a small book, the household ledger. Not the one that counted human lives, the one that tracked candles and flour and shoes. "What I do best," Margaret said calmly, dipping her pen, "putting things in their proper place." She wrote carefully, "Child to be born to house servant Eliza, recorded as issue of stable hand Joseph." Eliza blinked. "Joseph?" she echoed. "He ain't never—" "He won't deny it," Margaret said. "He owes me favors, and the town will believe it." Eliza winced at the casual cruelty of the town, not at Margaret. "And Mr. Bowman?" she asked. Margaret's grip tightened on the pen. "He will suspect," she said. "But suspicion is not proof, and proof requires him to explain why he was in your bed." She blotted the ink. "He won't." This was intimacy without softness, a quiet alliance written in ink and nerve, a lie chosen not for comfort, but for survival. "So the baby stays?" Eliza asked. "The baby stays," Margaret said, "not as his heir, not as another second anything." Tears spilled down Eliza's cheeks. She pressed her hands to her face. "You're crying," Margaret said gently. "Because it's small, isn't it? Not freedom, not north." Eliza shook her head. "I'm crying," she said hoarsely, "because it's more than I thought I'd get." They stood there, two women clutching different ends of the same thin mercy. When the child came, she came quietly, a little girl with skin the color of late summer and eyes that carried too much of Mr. Bowman's shape in them. Margaret was the first white person to hold her. She cradled the baby carefully, looking down at the tiny, serious face. "We'll call her Anna," Margaret said. "It's a good, solid name. Could belong to anyone." Eliza watched from the bed, exhausted. Will you love her?" she asked. Margaret's mouth tightened. "I will keep her alive," she said. "I will not sell her. I will not let him arrange her future." Sometimes in this world, that was the closest thing to love women were allowed to give. When Mr. Beaumont saw the baby, his face moved through recognition, denial, and something like resentment. "She favors someone," he muttered. "Joseph," Margaret said smoothly. "You can see it around the mouth," he did not argue. Pride, fear, and habit swallowed his words, and so the story held. Life at Beaumont Place did not change loudly. It changed the way water changes stone, slowly, quietly, with patience that could outlast anger. the ledger lie held. To the town, Anna was the stable hand's child. To the law, she was nothing special. To the house, she was simply another small body, moving through halls that remembered too much. Mr. Beaumont never claimed her. He watched her from doorways, counted months on his fingers, studied her face too closely when he thought no one noticed. But he never spoke. Men like him preferred secrets they could swallow over truths that would choke them in public. Eliza carried her daughter everywhere at first, on her hip, against her chest, wrapped close enough that their breathing learned each other's rhythm. At night, when the house finally quieted, Eliza pressed her cheek to Anna's soft hair and listened to the tiny heartbeat that proved something had survived. Sometimes Margaret stood in the doorway watching. She never interrupted. She never reached out. But her presence lingered, steady, observant, guarding the edges. This was how women loved in a world that punished tenderness, by staying, by noticing. By refusing to look away. Margaret Beaumont aged differently after that. She did not soften, she sharpened. Her authority moved through the house like a current, quiet, unmistakable. Servants learned which orders came from habit and which came from... Will Mr. Beaumont learned too. He still owned the house on paper, but Margaret owned the rooms. She walked into spaces he assumed were private. She rearranged his habits the way she rearranged furniture, without asking, and every time she did, she reminded him without words. You are not as alone in control as you think. Anna grew quickly. By 5, she could carry small baskets, without dropping them. By 7, she learned which floorboards sang and which stayed silent. By 10, she could light lamps without standing on a stool. She was quiet, observant, quick with her hands. Why you look at me like that? She asked her mother once, catching Eliza watching her too closely. Eliza smiled softly. Just counting, she said. Counting what? How many nights you've slept safe? How many mornings you've woken under the same roof? How many days? Your name hasn't been written down for sale. But Eliza only said, nothing that matters to you yet. Sometimes when Anna passed Margaret in the hall, Margaret nodded once. No smile. No warmth, just acknowledgement. And in that small gesture lived a promise never spoken aloud. I remember how you came into this world, and I will not let it swallow you. Eliza saw it. She understood. Mr. Beaumont grew smaller as years passed, not in size, but in presence. He drank more, stayed in town longer, returned quieter. The house learned to move around him rather than with him. At meals, Margaret still poured his wine, still smiled at guests, still played the part. But behind closed doors, her silence was louder than any argument she remembered, and men like him could not survive being remembered clearly. There was never a paper that called Eliza a second wife, no church record. No marriage line, no acknowledgement. On paper, she remained female, age approximate, house servant. Anna was issue of Joseph. Margaret was wife, the house intact, but paper was never where truth lived. The truth lived elsewhere, in women's whispers over washtubs, in midwives' hands, in quiet nights when storms rolled in and someone stared at a ceiling, listening for footsteps that did not come. It lived in the way Margaret paused at Anna's doorway longer than necessary, in the way Eliza counted days instead of years, in the way love learned to disguise itself as vigilance. Years later, when the house itself began to rot, when ledgers turned to dust and names faded from stone, the story remained. Not written. Remembered. The master used his slave as his second wife, and when the real wife walked into the room, the only thing that saved the child they made was the story she chose to tell. That story survived, in voices like this one, told long after the house fell quiet. Final line. Gentle, intimate fade-out, because some histories are not meant to be archived, they are meant to be held, close, quiet, and passed carefully from one listening heart to another.